The night hung heavy over the naval base as the rain crashed against the steel rooftops like a relentless drum, and the wind howled across the empty corridors as if warning those who dared to walk its path, and in the dimly lit hallway, footsteps echoed like distant gunfire, growing louder with every step as the young officer named Ethan strode forward, shoulders tense, heart pounding, because he had been summoned to investigate rumors of a mysterious high-ranking arrival, one that no one had seen yet, but everyone whispered about in fear and admiration. But Ethan did not care about rank or status. He cared about discipline, obedience, and making sure no one disrespected the uniform, but deep down a strange unease stirred in him like a storm waiting to break. And he could not tell if it was instinct or danger or something far worse that was creeping closer with each breath he took as the hallway seemed to stretch endlessly before him, hiding secrets in every shadow, waiting for the moment to strike and reveal the truth that would change everything forever. And just as he reached the final corner, he heard a soft yet commanding voice, and he froze, unsure if he was ready to face whomever stood beyond that door, only to realize he might already be too late to turn back now. The door creaked open as if resisting the presence that dared to push it, and inside stood a woman dripping with rainwater, yet perfectly composed, her eyes sharp as blades, her posture unwavering. And something about her made the air grow heavy, as though she carried the weight of countless battles and victories in her silent stride. But Ethan saw only a stranger, someone who had entered the restricted area without clearance, and he felt anger flare through him like fire igniting dry leaves, and without thinking he stepped forward, blocking her path, his voice firm as he demanded identification. But the woman said nothing. She only looked at him with an unsettling calm that made his pulse stutter, because her gaze felt like a test, like she was measuring his worth and finding him lacking. And that quiet judgment burned more than any shouted insult ever could. But still he stood his ground, refusing to be intimidated by someone who seemed to dismiss him so effortlessly, unaware that he was standing at the edge of a moment that would define the course of his entire career and his life. And as the silence stretched longer than it should have, he felt the storm outside pounding against the walls, mirroring the storm rising within him. The tension thickened with every breath as Ethan stepped closer, his boots echoing across the floor, and the mysterious woman remained unmoving, like a statue carved from stone, and his frustration reached its limit as he grabbed her arm, intending to escort her out. But in a flash, her hand snapped up with precision and strength that shocked him, stopping his motion with only 2 fingers, as if he were nothing more than a child. And in that instant, his mind screamed warning. Yet pride silenced it as he yanked his arm free and closed the gap, slamming her back gently but firmly against the cold wall, his authority blazing as he growled that no one ignored protocol in his base, not even her, and for a fleeting second he thought he saw a flicker of sadness or disappointment in her eyes. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by a chilling calm that felt more dangerous than any threat, and Ethan felt the air shift as if the room itself recognized a power he did not. And his breath came slower, heavier, as the gravity of his actions pressed upon him like a crushing weight he did not yet understand. Rainwater dripped from her hair onto the floor, forming small ripples that spread outward like the consequences of a decision, and she lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes with piercing clarity that made him feel exposed, as though she could see every doubt, every fear, every insecurity buried deep within him. And for the first time, Ethan hesitated, his grip on her arm loosening as something inside him whispered that he had made a grave mistake. But still his pride chained him in place, unwilling to retreat, unwilling to appear weak in front of someone who challenged him. Without a single word, yet the silence between them felt louder than any argument, echoing through the room like thunder, and he wondered why she had not fought back, Why she remained so composed even when pushed to the wall, literally and metaphorically. And the answer hovered just beyond his reach, like a memory he could not grasp. And as that thought consumed him, he heard distant footsteps marching in unison, growing closer with alarming speed, and the sound carried with it an authority he could not ignore, because only one type of arrival moved with such precision. The heavy iron doors burst open as high-ranking officers flooded into the room, their uniforms immaculate, their faces grim with urgency, each one snapping to attention the moment. They laid eyes on the woman pinned against the wall, and Ethan blinked in confusion, watching in disbelief as the very officers who rarely bowed to anyone stood straight as pillars and saluted in perfect synchronization, their voices ringing out, in unison with a title he had only ever read about in classified reports. A title reserved for legends rather than mortals, and as the words crashed against his ears, his heart stopped as he finally looked at her. Not as a trespasser, not as a mystery, but as the highest power in the entire fleet, the one person no one questioned, the one leader who had commanded impossible missions and reshaped destiny itself. And in that breath, everything shattered within him as he realized he had not only disrespected a superior officer, he had just shoved the Admiral in command, and the room fell eerily silent because everyone was waiting for her to speak and deliver the fate he feared more than death itself. Yet she only stood there calm and silent before finally turning her eyes back to him. And in that gaze he sensed something building, something inevitable, something that would change everything that happened next. But before he could understand what it was, she opened her mouth to speak, and the first word she chose was not what he expected at all, leaving him frozen as the truth he never saw coming began to unfold in the most terrifying way imaginable. The room felt colder than the storm outside as every officer stood motionless, their eyes flicking, between Ethan and the Admiral, while the weight of silence pressed down like a 1,000-pound anchor, and Ethan could barely breathe as he waited for her to speak, expecting fury or punishment or the end of his career. But instead, she simply adjusted her uniform with calm precision and stepped away from the wall as though nothing had happened, her voice steady as she told the officers to stand down and return to their posts, leaving everyone stunned because no one had ever seen the Admiral show restraint, especially not after such blatant disrespect, and Ethan stood frozen, unsure if he should speak or apologize or simply disappear into the floor. But before he could decide, the Admiral turned to him, her eyes holding a depth that made his chest tighten, and she said his name. Not his rank, but his name with a tone that carried familiarity and something else, something he could not understand yet. And that confused him more than any reprimand ever could, because how did she know his name when he had never met her before, or so he believed? And as the officers hesitated, the Admiral repeated her command with quiet authority that brooked no argument, and one by one they filed out, leaving only the two of them in the room surrounded by the echo of what had just happened, and the unresolved tension lingering like lightning waiting to strike. Ethan swallowed hard, his mind racing with questions and panic and disbelief because nothing made sense, and his instincts screamed that he was trapped in a situation far beyond anything he had ever faced. But the Admiral simply walked past him as though inviting him to follow, and despite his turmoil, his feet moved on their own, drawn by something undeniable like gravity, and together they stepped into the long corridor where the storm outside rattled the windows and the lights flickered, as if even the base itself could sense the intensity of the moment, and Ethan finally found his voice barely managing to ask why she had not disciplined him, why she had let such an offense go unpunished. But the Admiral did not answer immediately. Instead, she kept walking, her footsteps steady, her presence unshaken, until they reached a quiet observation deck overlooking the crashing waves, and only then did she stop, resting her hands behind her back as she stared into the darkness as though searching for something hidden beneath the surface. and Ethan stood a few steps behind, unsure if he was allowed to stand beside her. But she gestured for him to join, and the softness of that gesture unsettled him more than any harsh order could ever have, because it hinted at something deeply personal, something he was not prepared to uncover yet. He stepped forward anyway, driven by a curiosity he could no longer ignore. The storm raged across the ocean, its towering waves illuminated by flashes of lightning, as if the sky itself was at war, and the Admiral spoke without turning her head, her voice low yet unwavering as she told Ethan that leadership was not about rank or fear, but about understanding the weight of responsibility and knowing when to show strength and when to show restraint, and her words cut deeper than any reprimand because they were true, and Ethan felt shame coil around his heart as he remembered how quickly he had acted out of pride, how he had let anger blind him to reason and respect, but before he could apologize, she continued saying that she did not stop him earlier because she wanted to see if he was the same as before or if he had changed. And that statement sent shock rippling through his mind like a detonated charge because it implied history, a past connection he was unaware of, and he frowned, confused, as he tried to recall any memory of meeting her before. But his mind came up empty until she finally turned to face him fully, her gaze holding a storm fiercer than the one outside. And she said he might not remember her. But she remembered him, and her voice carried a quiet pain that made his heart stutter. Questions flooded his thoughts like a tidal wave as he struggled to piece together her words, but she did not wait for him to respond. Instead, she stepped, closer, closing the distance between them until he could feel the intensity of her presence, like heat radiating off her skin, and her eyes softened ever so slightly as she spoke his full name, the one only a few people ever used, and suddenly a memory flickered in his mind like a candle in the dark, a memory of a training camp long ago when he was just a young recruit full of fire and determination. And there had been a woman there too, younger and quieter, but strong in a way that few noticed. And he remembered how their paths had crossed briefly, how he had once stood up for her during a brutal exercise, how he had told her she would become a great leader one day, and then they went their separate ways as life pulled them in different directions. But that moment had stayed with her like a spark that ignited her journey, and Ethan stared at her in disbelief as realization settled over him like a heavy cloak, because the woman standing before him, the Admiral in command, was that same cadet he had unknowingly encouraged so many years ago, and his breath caught in his throat as the past and present collided in a way he never could have imagined. The storm outside slammed against the glass as if echoing the storm inside his heart, and Ethan felt a surge of emotions, guilt, admiration, confusion, and something else he could not name as he tried to process everything she had revealed, and the Admiral looked away slightly, her voice quieter now as she said that she had not forgotten his words, that his belief in her had given her strength during the darkest days of her career, and that without that moment she might not have become the leader she was today. And those words hit harder than any punch, because he had never known the impact of his actions, never realized that a single moment of kindness had helped shape the future of the entire fleet. And the weight of that truth humbled him beyond measure as he finally bowed his head and told her he was sorry not just for pushing her, but for failing to recognize her, for losing sight of what truly mattered. And the Admiral studied him silently before nodding once, as though accepting his apology not only for the recent incident, but for the years of distance between them, and that small nod eased some of the tension in his chest, but also sparked a new unease, because if she remembered him so clearly, then why had she come here tonight? What did she want from him now? The wind roared and lightning carved the sky in jagged lines as the Admiral stepped back, her expression shifting from personal to professional, as she informed him that she had chosen him specifically for a mission classified beyond Top Secret 1 that required absolute loyalty, precision, and the ability to challenge orders when necessary. And Ethan blinked, taken aback, because he was known for his discipline and strict adherence to rules, not for breaking them. But the Admiral looked at him with a knowing gaze and said that true. Leadership meant knowing when to enforce the rules and when to bend them to protect those who could not protect themselves. And those words stirred something deep inside him, something that had been buried beneath layers of protocol and duty, a memory of why he had joined the military in the first place, to make a difference, to defend the innocent, to be more than just another soldier. And the Admiral saw the change in his eyes, and she turned to leave, telling him to report to the briefing room at 0600 hours sharp, because what awaited them would test every limit they had. And as she walked away, her silhouette framed by the flickering lights, Ethan felt his resolve solidify like steel, because he knew this mission would change everything. But he also knew he could no longer run from the past or the future that awaited him. The hallway stretched long and silent as Ethan stood alone watching the Admiral disappear into the shadows, and the storm outside slowly began to fade, as though acknowledging the shift within him, and he took a deep breath, steadying himself as the weight of his actions and the promise of what lay ahead intertwined in his mind like two sides of the same coin. And he wondered what kind of mission would require the Admiral herself to personally recruit him, what danger awaited them beyond the horizon, and why she had truly shown mercy instead of destroying his career in an instant. And those questions burned in his thoughts with every step he took back toward his quarters, until finally he reached his door and paused, his hand hovering over the handle as unease crawled up his spine, because for reasons he could not explain, he felt watched not by cameras or soldiers, but by something else. Something hidden, lurking in the unseen depths of the base. And as thunder rumbled distantly, he sensed that the real storm had only just begun, and the mission waiting for him would force him to confront not only enemies from outside, but ghosts from within. And just as he touched the door, a faint echo of footsteps sounded behind him, soft, deliberate, and far too close for comfort, making his heart jolt as he slowly turned to see who or what was standing there, waiting in the darkness, ready to reveal the next impossible truth that he was not prepared to face yet, but would have no choice except to confront in the moment that followed. The hallway behind Ethan was cloaked in shadows as the faint footsteps grew louder, each one deliberate and steady, like a predator stalking its prey. And he turned slowly, his muscles tensing as his eyes strained to pierce the darkness, expecting a threat. But what emerged from the dim light was not an enemy. Rather, it was a figure he recognized all too well. His closest friend, Lieutenant Marcus, a man known for his sharp instincts and unmatched loyalty. Yet tonight his face carried a tension Ethan had never seen before, as if he were holding back the truth of a storm, even greater than the one outside. And Marcus stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper, as he asked Ethan if the rumors were true, if he had actually confronted the Admiral. And Ethan stiffened, unsure how word had spread so fast. But before he could answer, Marcus grabbed his shoulder, his expression torn between disbelief and urgency, warning him that there were eyes everywhere, and that the Admiral was involved in something far bigger than anyone in the base, understood something that had already put several officers under surveillance, and possibly in danger. And Ethan felt a chill crawl down his spine as he realized Marcus was not just warning him, he was afraid, and Marcus was never afraid. The corridor lights flickered once, twice, as if reacting to the tension in the air, and Marcus leaned in closer, speaking quicker now as he told Ethan that strange movements had been happening across the fleet, elite units being relocated without explanation, secret files disappearing overnight, high-ranking officials vanishing without a trace, and whispers of an internal enemy, one that operated from the shadows wearing the uniforms of allies while carrying the intentions of traitors. But every time Marcus tried to investigate, he hit walls of silence and restricted access even for someone with his clearance, and he believed the Admiral was the only one who knew the full truth. Yet she refused to share it with anyone except those she trusted completely. And Ethan frowned, trying to understand why Marcus was telling him this now, and Marcus looked him in the eyes with a seriousness that made Ethan's heart tighten, saying that trust was a dangerous currency, and that if the Admiral had chosen him for this mission, it meant she believed he was either the key to saving everything, or the shield that had to be broken to reach her true goal. And Ethan felt the ground shift beneath his feet, as the weight of Marcus's words sank in. Lightning flashed outside, casting brief shadows through the windows as Marcus stepped back, his voice lowering further as though the walls themselves might be listening. And he confessed that he had found something buried in the classified archive, an operation that had never been officially recorded, yet tied back to the Admiral, and a code name known only in the deepest circles of secrecy. Phantom Storm, and Ethan felt a flicker of recognition, though he could not recall where he had heard that term, and Marcus said no one knew what the operation truly was, but those who dug too deep into it disappeared, and those who survived refused to speak, and Ethan felt unease tighten around his chest like chains, as Marcus warned him that whatever mission the Admiral was planning, it was connected to Phantom Storm, and the last person she had recruited for something like this had vanished without a trace, leaving only silence behind, and Marcus gripped Ethan's arm, his eyes fierce, as he said that if Ethan was going to follow her, he had to be ready to face the truth, even if it shattered everything he believed in. The storm outside calmed into a heavy rain as silence fell between them, and Ethan looked at Marcus, his mind racing with memories of the Admiral, her calm power, her piercing gaze, the unspoken history between them, and he felt torn between loyalty to his friend and the pull of something deeper, something that told him the Admiral was not the enemy, but the key, and Marcus seemed to read the conflict in his eyes because he stepped back with resignation in his shoulders, telling Ethan that if he still chose to follow her, then he would have his back, but he also warned that trust could become a weapon in the wrong hands, and Ethan nodded, feeling the gravity of his decision settle over him like armor because he knew he could not turn away now, not when the truth was so close to surfacing, and Marcus finally left, disappearing down the corridor, leaving behind a silence that felt more dangerous than any threat, and Ethan stood alone again, but no longer uncertain, his resolve hardening, because he knew tomorrow at 0600 everything would begin, and there would be no turning back. The night passed with restless thoughts haunting his mind as he lay in his bunk unable to sleep, and every time he closed his eyes, he saw the Admiral's gaze heavy with unspoken truths, and Marcus's warning echoing in his ears like the toll of a distant bell. But when morning came, he rose with purpose, his boots hitting the floor with finality, and he donned his uniform like a warrior preparing for battle. Each motion, precise, steady, controlled, even though his heart thundered beneath the surface, and the base felt unnaturally quiet as he made his way to the restricted briefing room guarded by 2 elite soldiers who scanned him before silently allowing him to enter. And inside the room, the lights were dim, the air cold, and the walls lined with encrypted monitors flickering with classified data streams, and at the center of the room stood the Admiral, her presence commanding the entire space like the eye of a hurricane, and she nodded once as he approached, acknowledging his arrival before turning to face the large digital map on the wall displaying regions marked with red zones and flashing signals of unknown origin. Before Ethan could speak, the door opened again and more figures entered one by one, each a high-ranking officer or specialist from different divisions. Tactical intelligence, cyber warfare, aviation, and even black ops units, and Ethan recognized some of them, legends known for impossible missions and silent victories, yet each one carried the same deadly seriousness in their eyes, and Ethan realized this was not just any mission. This was a convergence of the best the fleet had ever produced, and the Admiral stood before them, her voice steady as she began the briefing, revealing that multiple bases across the fleet had been compromised not by external enemies, but by an organized force hidden within their own ranks. passing intelligence sabotaging operations and gathering power for a silent coup. And the room tensed as she spoke of deep infiltration, sleeper agents and encrypted codes, traced back to Project Phantom Storm, a rogue initiative born years ago under the guise of defense, but twisted into something darker, seeking control over the entire naval command structure, and Ethan felt a cold dread forming in his chest as he remembered Marcus's warning. The Admiral continued explaining that they had identified only fragments of the network, but each clue pointed toward a central hub, a black site buried beneath remote waters, where the rogue faction operated in total secrecy, and every attempt to locate it had failed until now, because they had discovered a pattern hidden in the transmissions, one only someone with Ethan's experience in strategic decryption could detect. And Ethan blinked, realizing she had chosen him not only for their past, but for his unique skill set, and the Admiral turned to face him directly, her eyes steady as she said he would lead the infiltration team alongside her, because this mission required not just strategy, but trust, the kind built through fire and memory. And Ethan nodded with solemn understanding as the room absorbed the weight of the task ahead, and the Admiral declared that this mission would decide the fate of the fleet and perhaps even their world, and failure was not an option, but betrayal would be inevitable. And Ethan felt a chill at the word betrayal, wondering who among them might not be what they appeared. The room fell silent as the lights dimmed and the map shifted to reveal the approach route to the hidden facility deep beneath the ocean floor, and the Admiral outlined the plan in precise detail, emphasizing the dangers, the traps, the unknown variables that could kill them all before they even reached their target, and yet not a single person backed away because each of them knew the cost of doing nothing would be far greater. And Ethan felt a surge of determination rise within him because this was why he joined. This was the battle that mattered. And the Admiral closed the briefing with a single sentence that sent a ripple of electricity through the room, saying that the enemy was already watching, that they had likely infiltrated deeper than anyone realized, and that time was running out faster than they could comprehend. And her voice sharpened as she said they would launch in less than 24 hours, which meant every second from this point forward had to be used wisely and strategically. And Ethan exchanged glances with the others, seeing the unspoken question in their eyes: who among them could be trusted, and who was already working for the enemy, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And as that unsettling thought echoed through his mind, he felt the floor beneath him tremble, slightly, as though something massive was shifting somewhere far below the base, and for a single breath there was silence before the alarm suddenly blared to life, signaling a breach that no one saw coming and forcing Ethan and the others to face the horrifying reality that the mission had already begun before they were even ready, and someone inside the room might have been the one who triggered it without any warning at all. The shrill wail of the alarms tore through the briefing room, like a blade slicing through silence, and every officer snapped into motion as red lights bathed the walls in a warning glow that pulsed like a racing heartbeat. And the Admiral lifted her hand, commanding focus, as the doors sealed shut with a heavy clang, trapping them inside until the source of the breach could be identified, and Ethan felt adrenaline surge through his veins as his eyes darted to the monitors where security feeds flickered with static before revealing unidentified forces moving through the lower levels of the base with terrifying precision. And the Admiral's expression darkened as she issued rapid orders deploying defensive units, while instructing the team to remain on standby because the enemy was already inside, and they needed to determine how deep the infiltration went before making their next move. Ethan glanced at the other officers and saw suspicion forming in their eyes like cracks in glass because someone in this very room could have given the enemy access. And Marcus's warning echoed in Ethan's mind as he stepped forward, offering to assist with internal communications. But before he could move, the lights flickered violently, and the room went black, plunging them into suffocating darkness as the power grid failed, and only the emergency lights remained, casting eerie shadows across tense faces. and in that dim glow, Ethan heard a faint metallic click behind him, the unmistakable sound of a weapon being drawn, and he spun instinctively. Just in time to see one of the officers raising a concealed pistol aimed directly at the Admiral with cold betrayal etched into his eyes just as he pulled the trigger. Ethan lunged forward, pure instinct driving him as he slammed into the traitors. Arm deflecting the shot as the bullet whizzed past the Admiral and embedded itself in the wall with a deafening crack, and chaos erupted as the room burst into motion with shouts and gunfire, and the air filled with the sharp scent of gunpowder. And the traitor snarled with fury as he tried to fire again, but Ethan tackled him to the ground, grappling for control, while the others secured the exits and restrained more suspects who had been waiting for the signal to strike. And the Admiral stood unshaken, her gaze like steel, as she ordered the immediate lockdown of the entire base, and Ethan pinned the traitor with one final blow and ripped a data chip from his collar, realizing this was only the beginning because the enemy had revealed themselves too boldly, which meant they were hiding something even bigger in the shadows. And as the alarms continued to scream through the base, Ethan looked at the Admiral and saw in her eyes that the true mission was already shifting into something far more dangerous, and they had only seconds to decide their next move before the enemy made theirs first. The traitor laughed through bloodied lips as Ethan held him down, his voice dripping with arrogance as he said they were already too late. That phantom storm had activated its final phase, and the Admiral's eyes narrowed as she snatched the data chip from Ethan's hand, plugging it into the emergency console, and the screen flickered to life, revealing a countdown buried deep in the base systems, and Ethan's stomach dropped as he realized it was not just a breach. It was a timed detonation designed to destroy all evidence and bury every soul inside the Admiral's voice, cut through the panic commanding everyone to evacuate non-essential personnel, while the core team stayed to stop the countdown. And Ethan met her gaze, seeing unshakable resolve there, as she said, failure was not an option. And he nodded because he knew he would follow her into any fire. The team raced through the corridors with seconds ticking away each turn, revealing more signs of sabotage, and Ethan felt the base tremble as systems began to overload, and the Admiral led them to the control core, where the heart of the countdown pulsed like a bomb waiting to be unleashed. And just as Ethan reached for the terminal, a hidden figure stepped from the shadows, wearing a familiar uniform and a cold smile, ready to reveal the final betrayal that would change everything in a single breath.